Welcome to NibblePop Stories. Today we'll hear the story of Homer's Odyssey. A few days ago, I told you the tale of the Iliad. I hope you enjoyed it. In that story, I shared how the Trojan War raged for 10 long years and how the Greek heroes, who were still alive when the fighting ended, set out to find their way home. The Odyssey follows one hero in particular, Odysseus, and his long, winding journey back to his beloved home, the island of Ithaca. So close your eyes and imagine you're sitting by the sea, listening to an old, old story, a tale of courage, cleverness, and the long journey home. This is the story of Odysseus, ancient Greece's greatest traveler, and his quest to return to Ithaca. But before we begin, let me introduce you to Odysseus and Ithaca, the island he so desperately wanted to reach. Let me take you to Ithaca, a small rocky island in the blue Ionian Sea. Ithaca wasn't filled with riches or palaces. It was a simple place with steep hills, silver leaved olive trees, and narrow paths leading down to quiet beaches. People there worked hard. They tended their sheep and goats on the hillsides, fished in the calm waters, and gathered olives to press for golden oil. But even though Ithaca was small, it was proud because its king was brave and clever. Odysseus's home stood high above the sea. His wife Penelope was famous for her wisdom and patience, and their young son Telemachus looked up to his father, learning how to be kind and thoughtful. Odysseus was loved by his people, not just because he was strong, but because he was smart and quick thinking when things got tough. If there was a problem, Odysseus found just the right words to make peace. Because of him, Ithaca flourished. But peace doesn't last forever. Far across the sea, in the bright city of Troy, trouble was brewing. Queen Helen of Sparta was stolen from her home and taken to Troy. The Greek kings had sworn a promise, so they gathered their ships for war, ready to bring Helen back. Odysseus was one of them. He couldn't stay behind, even though it broke his heart. He said goodbye to Penelope and little Telemachus, never knowing how long it would be before he saw them again. He set sail with his men, leaving behind the olive trees and sunlit hills of Ithaca, heading for a world of heroes, battles, and the will of the gods. For 10 long years, the greatest warriors and kings in Greece fought beneath the high walls of Troy. You would recognize their names: Achilles, swift and powerful; Agamemnon, the mighty king and leader; Menelaus, who was married to Queen Helen. Odysseus was there too. He wasn't the strongest of them, but he was always the cleverest, quietly helping his friends with wise advice and secret tricks. The war seemed like it would never end. Both sides suffered and lost so much. No matter how hard the Greeks fought, Troy stayed strong. But while others grew tired or angry, Odysseus kept thinking. He knew they needed something different, not just swords and shields, but a little bit of cleverness. Odysseus came up with a plan. He had the Greeks build a huge wooden horse, hollow inside. Then he chose the bravest warriors and hid them in the belly of the horse. After that, he told the rest of the army to pretend to give up and sail away. When the Trojans woke, all they found was the horse at their gate. They thought it was a gift, the Greeks' way of saying they had given up. So they pulled it inside their walls and celebrated late into the night. Once Troy was sleeping, Odysseus and the hidden warriors slid out of the horse. They unlocked the city gates and let in the returning Greek army. Troy finally fell. The war was over because of Odysseus's clever plan, proof that brains can sometimes do what strength cannot. Now, with Troy defeated, there was only one thing Odysseus wanted: to go home, back to Ithaca's green hills and gentle shores. But the journey was far from simple. It would become its own adventure, a saga so full of twists and trials, it became the story we know as the Odyssey. Now, while Odysseus was battling monsters and facing dangers far from home, life in Ithaca kept moving. Odysseus's home, which used to echo with laughter, now felt empty and uncertain. Penelope, wise and patient, stayed in the palace. She took care of the household and waited every day for news, aching for her husband's safe return. Even though her heart hurt, she stayed strong, managing the estate, facing troubles, and protecting her honor when things got tough. Telemachus had been just a boy when his father sailed away to war. Now he was trying to grow up without Odysseus to guide him. He watched over the family land and the people, doing his best to be brave, even though he sometimes felt alone. Suitors from many islands started gathering in the great hall. They believed Odysseus would never come back. Each one hoped to marry Penelope and become the ruler of Ithaca. Every day, Penelope faced them with calm and clever words, always finding ways to delay making a choice. Telemachus tried to keep the peace, but the guests grew greedy and bold, thinking only about power. So Ithaca waited, holding its breath. The people stared across the waves, wishing for their king to return. Penelope and Telemachus, standing together, used every bit of courage and wit just to keep their home safe, hoping that someday fate would bring Odysseus back. In short, the stage was set for the great return. Meanwhile, as Ithaca waited and hoped, Odysseus and his men boarded their ships. They left the smoky ruins of Troy behind, the war at last over. As the sails unfurled, the men gazed toward the horizon, dreaming out loud about Ithaca's green hills, sweet smelling groves, and the voices of loved ones calling them home. Everyone felt the same hope in their hearts, just to see their homeland again and feel the earth of Ithaca beneath their feet. With laughter and song, they rowed away from shore, their spirits grown light with thoughts of victory and return. It felt like the worst was finally over. They expected the way ahead would be easy, a straight line back to their island and to peace. But the world beyond Troy was full of unknowns, and the gods, high above, had plans of their own. The journey home had only just begun. Their hopes high and the sea calm, Odysseus and his men sailed on until they reached the shores of Ismarus, the city of the cicones. At first glance, the land looked peaceful and still. The warriors, thinking fortune was on their side, saw an easy chance for treasure. The Greeks rushed ashore. They caught the townspeople off guard and quickly overcame them. Food and wine, cattle and shiny treasures, all seized and divided among the crew. On the sandy beach, they sang and feasted, forgetting the caution that had kept them alive for so many years. Odysseus, always wise, urged them, "Leave now before trouble finds us." But the taste of success was too sweet. His warning went unheard. Greed and pride made them slow. As night slipped away, the surviving cicones escaped inland. By dawn, the hills filled with angry warriors, far more than Odysseus's weary soldiers could ever fight off. The cicones were skilled in battle, both swift and fierce. A wild fight broke out along the shore. Odysseus and his men fought bravely, but the enemy numbers were far too great. 6 men from each ship fell before Odysseus finally gave the order, "Retreat to the boats." With arrows whistling behind them, the survivors ran for the ships and pushed off into the open sea. 10 days after Ismarus, the crew drifted to a soft, sunny island. The place was bright with flowers. The air felt gentle, almost sleepy. Here lived the lotus eaters, quiet people who spent their days tasting lotus fruit and forgetting their worries. Odysseus sent a few men to meet the locals. They were offered the sweet golden lotus. Just one bite, and all memory of home faded away. The men felt happy, sleepy, and peaceful. They forgot Ithaca. They forgot their families. All they wanted was to stay and eat more lotus. Odysseus soon saw the danger. He found his men stretched out on the grass, smiling softly. They begged him to let them stay, to leave the ships and the long journey behind. But Odysseus would not give up. He pulled his men away from the lotus eaters, even when they wept and pleaded. He dragged them back to the ship and tied them to the benches. He gave the order to sail at once. No time to lose. The ships left the island. The men, safe but a little sad, slowly remembered who they were and where they were going. Odysseus had saved his crew, not from a monster, but from a dream. He reminded them their true journey was still ahead and Ithaca was waiting. Leaving the dreamy land of the lotus eaters behind, Odysseus and his crew sailed on. Soon they landed on a strange wild shore. No signs of cities, only rolling hills and hidden caves. Odysseus and a group went ashore, searching for food and help. They found a giant cave filled with sheep and round cheeses. The air was cool, the place looked welcoming. The men wondered who lived there. They hoped for a friendly host. As night fell, the cave's true owner returned. It was Polyphemus, a cyclops, a huge one eyed giant. The giant blocked the cave's entrance with a massive stone and turned his wild gaze on the strangers. Odysseus tried to be polite, but the Cyclops cared nothing for the rules of hospitality. In moments, he reached out, grabbed 2 men, and ate them right there. The crew was trapped. All night they shook with fear, knowing help would not come. The next day, Polyphemus ate 2 more men. Odysseus made a plan. He offered the giant some wine, making Polyphemus drowsy and slow. When the Cyclops was full and sleepy, Odysseus told him, "My name is Nobody." Then, with his men, he lifted a sharp stake and drove it into Polyphemus's single eye. The cyclops roared with pain, but when the other cyclopses asked what was wrong, he answered, "Nobody is hurting me." So they went away. The next morning, Odysseus tied each of his crew to a sheep's belly. As the blind Polyphemus let his flock out to graze, the crew slipped safely beneath the woolly bellies and escaped to their ship. But as they sailed away, Odysseus could not keep quiet. He shouted his real name over the waves, proud of his cleverness. Polyphemus was furious. He called on his father, Poseidon, god of the sea, to curse Odysseus. At that moment, the crew's journey became even harder, the sea full of new dangers and the anger of a god. Odysseus realized too late. Sometimes pride is just as dangerous as any monster. The men sailed on, knowing the hardest part of their journey had only just begun. After the narrow escape from Polyphemus, Odysseus and his men sailed on. The sea was rough, but hope returned when they landed on the floating island of Aeolia. Aeolus, king of the winds, greeted them kindly. He listened to their story and wanted to help Odysseus reach Ithaca. Aeolus tied up all the troublesome winds inside a special bag and gave it to Odysseus. He then sent a gentle west wind to blow their ship directly toward Ithaca. Odysseus explained the gift to his crew. "With this, we'll ride safely to Ithaca. No storms, no trouble, we are almost home." The journey went smooth for days. Ithaca came into view, the hills and rooftops so close. Odysseus finally relaxed and closed his eyes for a nap. But the crew was restless. Some whispered, "Maybe the bag hides gold or silver. Aeolus and Odysseus are keeping a treasure from us." Curiosity grew, greed mixed with mistrust. While Odysseus slept, the crew opened the bag. Suddenly, wild winds burst out in every direction. The sea roared, the ship spun out of control and was blown far, far away from home. When Odysseus awoke, he saw their chance was lost. They turned their ship around and went back to Aeolus, begging for help. Aeolus looked at them sadly. He refused to help again, saying, "You are cursed by the gods. I cannot fight against their will." Odysseus and his men were sent back to the sea. Once again, home seemed very far away. After the wild winds pushed them far from Ithaca, Odysseus and his men kept going. Their hopes were shaken, but the journey continued. Soon they landed their ships at a place called Lamos, the land of the Laestrygonians. At first, the place looked peaceful, but the Laestrygonians were not ordinary people. They were giants, tall, powerful, hungry. Odysseus sent scouts to explore. The king of the Laestrygonians greeted them, but not with kindness. He grabbed a crewman and tried to drink his blood. Suddenly, the giants rushed out from all sides. They hurled huge boulders at the ships. Most of Odysseus's fleet was smashed to pieces in moments. The men tried to run, but the giant snatched them up and carried them off to eat. Only Odysseus's ship was anchored away from the harbor and escaped the attack. He called out to the survivors, and together they rowed away. Now, almost all the ships were gone. Only a small group remained, tired, scared, but alive. Next, the ship stopped at a green island called Aeia. the home of Circe, the enchantress. Circe lived in a beautiful house deep in the forest. She was a goddess with powerful magic, and her voice sounded gentle and kind. Odysseus sent some men to explore. Circe welcomed them, gave them food and drink, and then waved her hand. In an instant, his men turned to pigs. Odysseus heard what happened and set off for Circe's house. On the way, he met Hermes, messenger of the gods. Hermes handed Odysseus a special plant called molly and whispered, "Eat this, it will protect you from Circe's spell." Odysseus entered Circe's hall. Circe tried her magic, but Odysseus did not change. Impressed by his courage and immunity, Circe listened to him. She turned the pigs back into men. Circe became a friendly host. Odysseus and his crew stayed in her home for a whole year. They ate, rested, and almost forgot about their journey. But at last, Odysseus remembered Ithaca. When it was time to go, Circe asked Odysseus to visit the underworld because he needed to seek guidance from the prophet Tiresias, who alone could tell him how to reach Ithaca safely and how to appease the gods who were angry with him. She instructed Odysseus on how to travel to the land of the dead, perform the proper sacrifices, and call up the ghost of Tiresias. As the ship prepared to leave Aia, there was a bad news. One crew member, Elpenor, had fallen and died the night before. Circe's island was beautiful, but Odysseus and his men knew they had to keep moving if they wanted to see Ithaca again. After leaving Circe's island, Odysseus followed her advice. He sailed to the edge of the world where the sky was dark and the air felt cold and thin. Here was the entrance to the underworld, the land of the dead. Odysseus was nervous, but he had to find answers. He made sacrifices as the ancient rules demanded, calling out to the spirits. The first ghost to appear was Elpenor, the crewman lost on Circe's roof. Elpenor begged Odysseus, "Please go back and bury me the right way." Odysseus promised he would. Next came familiar shapes from the past. Odysseus saw his mother. She told him she had died of loneliness, waiting for her son to return. Old friends from Troy appeared: strong Achilles, wise Agamemnon, and other heroes who were lost to battle. Then came Tiresias, the blind prophet. He warned Odysseus that Poseidon was angry because he had blinded the cyclops Polyphemus, Poseidon's son. Because of this divine anger, his journey home would be full of danger. Still, Odysseus could eventually reach Ithaca if he and his crew controlled their greed and respected the gods. He advised him to avoid harming the cattle of the sun god, Helios, on the island of Thrinacia. If the men killed the sacred cattle, they would be punished, and Odysseus would return home alone. They should endure all hardships patiently, and once home, he must make peace with Poseidon by performing a special ritual far inland. Tiresias also foretold that Odysseus would find trouble in Ithaca, suitors eating up his wealth, and that he must defeat them to reclaim his home and family. Odysseus listened closely. When the visit was done, Odysseus returned to his ship. He knew the journey would be hard, but he also knew more about the way forward than ever before. Odysseus and his crew first returned to Aia to give Elpenor a proper burial. Circe greets them, and after her and Odysseus catch up for a bit, she warned them about what lay ahead. Now the time had come to face the sirens. The ship neared a quiet stretch of water. From the rocks ahead, the sirens waited, creatures with voices as beautiful as dreams, and songs meant to trap any sailor who passed by. Their music promised joy, secrets, and truth, but those who listened would never go home. Sailors, lost in the song, steered straight for the rocks and vanished. But Odysseus had a plan. Before they got close, he gave each crewman a lump of beeswax. They pressed the wax into their ears, blocking every sound. But Odysseus wanted to hear the sirens. He told his men, "Tie me tightly to the mast. No matter what I say, don't let me go." As they sailed between the rocks, the sirens began to sing. Their music filled the air, sweet, mysterious, and dangerous. Odysseus strained against the ropes, desperate to get closer. The crew ignored his cries. Focused on their task, deaf to the song, they rowed until the music faded and the rocks were behind them. Odysseus had heard the sirens and lived to tell the tale. His crew, safe because they trusted him, escaped a trap that had claimed many before them. The ship moved forward, and everyone remembered. Some dangers come with beautiful voices, and wisdom means knowing how to listen or not to listen when every instinct tells you otherwise. After surviving the Song of the Sirens, Odysseus and his crew braced for the next trial. Circe had warned them. Two monsters waited ahead. On one side, high above the waves, was Scylla. She was a huge creature with 6 heads, sharp teeth, and a hunger for sailors. Her cave was dark and narrow, her reach was quick. On the other side churned Charybdis, a massive whirlpool. 3 times a day, the sea spun and roared, sucking everything down into darkness. Odysseus had to choose. Go too close to Charybdis, and the whole ship would be pulled under. Steer near Scylla, they might lose a few men. He gave the order to row fast and steady, hugging the rocks by Scylla's cave. Suddenly, Scylla reached down and snatched 6 men, one for each head. The rest, stiff with fear, rowed hard and escaped the whirlpool. The survivors stared back. They mourned their friends and wondered how much more they could bear. But they were still afloat, still moving forward. Odysseus learned that some dangers forced to make hard choices. Sacrifice was sometimes the only path to survival, and no victory came without loss. Odysseus and his crew drifted on. Soon they reached a sunny island called Thrinacia, sacred to Helios, the sun god. Before landing, Odysseus warned his men, "These are the sacred cattle of Helios. No matter how hungry you get, do not touch a single cow or sheep." At first, everyone listened, but a terrible storm trapped them on the island for a month. Supplies ran out. Day after day, the men waited, growing weaker and more desperate. One day, while Odysseus fell asleep, hunger won over caution. His men killed and roasted the golden cattle. Helios saw what happened. Furious, he demanded justice from Zeus, king of the gods. The storm ended and the crew tried to sail away, but Zeus soon struck the ship with a thunderbolt. Waves crushed the boat. Every man except Odysseus was lost to the sea. Odysseus clung to a piece of wood, tossed by the waves. He managed to survive by grabbing onto a fig tree, while the rest were swallowed by the deep. Left alone and grieving, Odysseus floated once more, further from home than ever, but not ready to give up. Alone on the open sea, Odysseus drifted for days. He clung to the remains of his ship, battered by wind and water. At last, he washed up on a quiet island called Ogygia. The island belonged to Calypso, a nymph whose beauty matched the paradise around her. She found Odysseus, tired and broken, and cared for him in her caves. Calypso offered him everything: her love, endless comfort, and even immortality. She would make Odysseus young forever if he stayed by her side. But Odysseus missed Ithaca more than anything. He thought of Penelope, of home, of the life he once knew. No gifts or magic could change his heart. 7 long years passed. Each day, Odysseus stared at the horizon, hoping for freedom. Finally, the gods stepped in. They sent a message to Calypso. Odysseus must be allowed to go home. Calypso was sad, but obeyed the gods. She helped Odysseus build a raft and gave him supplies. Odysseus thanked Calypso and left Ogygia behind. His journey was not over, but the hope of Ithaca burned brighter than ever. Odysseus left Calypso's island on a simple raft. He sailed alone, hoping the gods would guide him home. But storms weren't finished with him yet. Poseidon sent giant waves that smashed his raft and tossed him in the water. Odysseus barely survived and washed ashore on Scheria, the land of the Phaeacians. Exhausted, he hid in the woods and slept. The next morning, Princess Nausicaa found him by the river. She saw he needed help and gave him food, clothes, and kind words. Nausicaa took Odysseus to her father, King Alcinous. At the palace, Odysseus told the Phaeacians about his adventures, giants, monsters, gods, and his dream of home. The Phaeacians listened closely and felt moved by his hardships. Wanting to help, King Alcinous gave Odysseus a ship, a crew, and gifts. They sailed him through the night, past sleeping waves, toward Ithaca. Thanks to their kindness, Odysseus was finally close to home, his long journey almost at an end. Finally, Odysseus arrived at Ithaca. He set foot on the shore he had missed for so many years. But home was not as he remembered. His palace was full of noisy, greedy suitors, all hoping to marry Penelope and claim Odysseus's kingdom. Knowing it was dangerous to be seen, Odysseus was helped by Athena, the wise goddess. With her magic, she disguised him as an old beggar, tired, poor, and harmless. Odysseus entered his home quietly, watching and listening. No one recognized him. He found his son, Telemachus, now grown tall and strong. Father and son greeted each other with joy and tears, but kept their secret. Together, they planned how to deal with the suitors and win back their home. Odysseus knew that courage and cleverness would matter more than ever. The hardest part was still ahead, but at last he was home, ready to fight for his family and his future. Penelope had spent many long years waiting and hoping. By the time the suitors crowded her home, she believed her husband was gone forever. Still, Penelope stayed loyal. She put off the suitors with clever promises and tasks, anything to delay having to choose one. At last, hope nearly gone, she came up with a final test. She told the suitors, I will marry the one who can string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads. The suitors lined up, eager to win. Every one of them failed to even bend the bow. Then the old beggar, Odysseus in disguise, asked to try. People laughed, thinking it was impossible, but he picked up the bow, strung it without effort, and then shot the arrow straight through every axe. Suddenly, Odysseus revealed himself. With Telemachus and a few loyal servants, he drove out the suitors and reclaimed his home. Penelope still could not believe it was really her husband. She wanted to be sure anyone could look like her husband after so many years. So Penelope thought of a secret only she and Odysseus shared, the story of their marriage bed. She told her servants to move the bed out of the bedroom and make it ready for Odysseus. Odysseus heard this and was surprised. He replied, no one can move that bed. I built our room around an old olive tree. I shaped the trunk into the post of our bed. The roots are deep in the ground. It cannot be lifted or carried away. Hearing this, Penelope knew without doubt that he was her true husband. All her years of patience were finally rewarded. They embraced, hearts full with the joy of true reunion after years of longing and doubt. Odysseus was finally home, wiser, kinder, and king once more. His journey had ended, and his family was whole again. And this brings us to the end of the story of the Odyssey. If you have liked this, do subscribe to our channel because we come up with such stories to help you know about these great works of literature. So, till we meet again, this is Monami Mukherjee signing off. Good night.